For more on this, we're joined now by William Black. He's currently a professor at the University of Missouri and a former federal regulator. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you.
So when we look at this G20 summit, how do leaders get past Syria and discuss economic issues?
They just have to be disciplined enough to actually schedule subjects that exclude Syria and actually then keep to the agenda and not have it veer off into discussions of Syria. So it takes good staffing and it takes some discipline in how you run a meeting.
So if we look at one of the issues they're going to be talking about, and that is ending or curtailing tax avoidance, is that really possible?
Ending, no, because tax evasion has existed from the beginning of taxation and will continue forever. Reducing, yes, that's definitely something that you can do. Information exchanges, frankly, are not going to be terribly effective in doing that, but there are ways to use leverage against the tax havens, and the tax havens are central to tax evasion by elites.
What about the economies of emerging markets? They will be talking about that at the G20 summit. What can be done to help those economies?
Well, fundamentally, what you need is growth. And what you're seeing is in a raft of nations, the adoption of anti-growth strategies, austerity. Obviously, the Eurozone is infamous for this, but Japan is about to embark on this through a large sales tax increase. And the United States doesn't get as much publicity for it, but actually fiscal policy has become more and more austere over about the last 18 months. And all of this means that you get very limited growth, sometimes even negative growth, out of three of the areas that are supposed to be economic powerhouses, pulling much of the developing world along.
Well, as you pointed out, very negative growth in many areas, and also the fact that there's plenty of evidence around to show that austerity has not worked. So why do these leaders still forge ahead with that policy?
It is the triumph of ideology over rationality, and it's also the inability of leaders in many parts of the world to admit that they've made mistakes, so they continue down the same path.
Well, the G20 has played quite a big role in helping the world out of the financial crisis. Does it still have that clout?
Well, that comes back to what we were just talking about. It isn't the G20 as an organization that has done something. It is mostly the United States and China that have been important. The United States had modest stimulus, and that produced modest growth. But of course, the United States is still by far the largest world economy, and that has meant that the United States has purchased enormous numbers of exports from other countries, and that was helpful. And China's role, of course, is well known as well. And so you have to continue those roles, and you have to get the Eurozone and Japan, which for the better part of 5 years for the Eurozone and the better part of 20 years for Japan, have been, if anything, drags on world economic growth. And we're still talking about some of the largest economies in the world when we talk about the Eurozone and Japan.
And we've been hearing lots of talk about global corporate governance. What areas of agreement can the G20 come up with?
Well, I don't think anything serious is going to come out of the G20 on global corporate governance. In fact, it would be a worthy thing to try to reverse the current pattern, but the current pattern is exactly the opposite. We call it the race to the bottom, or the competition in laxity in governance. And I must say that the United States and our state of Delaware, which is the leading place for incorporation in the world in terms of assets, is the leader in the race to the bottom. And there is no serious effort in Delaware to reverse that, and no serious effort at the level of Washington, D.C. to reverse what Delaware is doing either.
But would you think that, we had manipulation recently, things like LIBOR, which we saw, wouldn't they take any action to prevent something like that happening in future?
Right now, there are some things, not in the G20, but in Europarliament, that are potentially helpful. And this has caused a crisis because, of course, the City of London won the race to the bottom and very much is afraid that there might be tougher rules on governance. And this is actually helping to propel what at this point in the polls, it's early still because the plebiscite won't occur for several years, but in the polls right now, the United Kingdom, a slight plurality would actually pull out of the EU.
Okay, so we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks for joining us.